This is Adreana in Long Beach, and in this episode, I'm excited to share with you a very special presentation from Peggy, Trotter, Dammond, Preacely, one of the original freedom riders from the 1960s civil rights movement. Mrs. Preacely spoke at First Congregational Church of Long Beach on February 8th, 2026. Mrs. Preacely is a freedom rider, poet, and dedicated activist of the civil rights movement who happens to also live in Long Beach, California. Mrs. Preacely shares her firsthand experiences from the 1950s and 60s, offering a rare and vital perspective on the fight for justice in America. In addition, she shares her family's long history of resistance to white supremacy, starting with her ancestors, the Crafts. Mr. and Mrs. Craft ran away from slavery together. The way they ran away is harrowing, and Mrs. Preacely tells the famous tale in her presentation. I'm always asking you to like my videos and subscribe to my channel, and today is no different. But I have a special request for you on this video. Like, subscribe, and share this video with an African-American high school student you know. Suggest to him or her that they let their history teacher know about this video presentation from an actual freedom rider, and that they ask the history teacher if they can get extra credit for writing a report about what they saw in this video. Our children need to know this history, now especially as many states are attempting to remove this history from the school curriculum. So please, do your part to spread this video to our young people.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tina Datsko de Sanchez, and I serve as poet and residence here at First Church. I am honored and delighted to introduce you to my dear friend, Peggy Trotter, Dammond, Preacely. Peggy and I met about 12 years ago at water aerobics, when we discovered that we're not only both poets, but both poets serving churches. We became fast friends. Peggy's already a friend of First Church, having performed her poetry in Confluent Spirit, Art, and Justice in November 2024. It is a dream fulfilled to bring Peggy here today to share her story and her poetry. I'm grateful to the Reverend Patron Lee Sternberg, to the Board of Cultural Arts and its co-chairs Tim Mountain and Julie Ford, and to the library team for their collaboration on this event. And some of you may have heard some of this summary during the service, but for people who weren't there, I'm going to recap. Peggy's talk and slide presentation is entitled, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Us Round, a song from her freedom movement days. The slide presentation includes images representing 150 years of her family's extraordinary history, as well as her experience as a freedom writer and community activist. Ms. Preacely is one of the great-great-grandchildren of William and Ellen Craft, who self-liberated from enslavement in Macon, Georgia in 1848. Ms. Preacely is a working poet and a contributing author of Hands on the Freedom Plow, personal accounts by women in SNCC, which is Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which also describes her family legacy and history of activism that shaped her life since she was a teenager growing up in Harlem, New York City. She and her granddaughter, Kaylin, have just published her first book of collective poetry, History in My Pocket, Spirit in My Mouth, which is available here today for pre-order. Ms. Preacely retired from the City of Long Beach Department of Health and Human Services in 2011 and has a Master of Public Health from California State University. She is a poet laureate of Holman United Methodist Church of Los Angeles. She is also a volunteer for Interval House crisis shelters for victims of domestic violence in Long Beach, and a member of the African American Heritage Society and the African American Cultural Center of Long Beach. She currently lives in Long Beach with her husband, Ernest Preacely, who's right here in the front row, and near her youngest granddaughter, Kaylin Craft Day Lyons, who will be, she'll be back at the book table also. And her daughter, Shanti Craft Day, who is also sitting in the back there, and son Christopher Trotter Day and their families, who often join her in presentations. And as you can see, some of them are here today. She has 9 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Peggy Trotter Dammond Preacely.
Thank you, Tina. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters and friends and family, And thank you to Reverend Petra and the members of the First Congregational Church of Long Beach Board of Cultural Arts, especially to Tina, who is my friend and fellow writer. Thank you for inviting me and my family to worship with you today and to share our family history of activism and education as we discuss the hope for our nation at this critical time for democracy in America. This presentation will include a slideshow and some poetry, of course, and a brief discussion afterwards with you as time permits. I know all of you are busy, so we're going to be moving as rapidly as we can. My granddaughter Kaylin and I have worked hard to cover 200 years of the story of our activism of our family in less than an hour. But we have so much to share that we certainly intend to try. We do have good news that our recently published book of poetry has been in much demand, so our inventory today is lower than we expected. However, we do have a pre-order website where you can prepay and have your signed copy delivered. We also have a few other things available relating to my poetry, and they can be ordered online. What I'd like to do is just start with a moment of silence for the lives lost in the distant past, as well as those lives that we are losing as we stand and sit here today. The struggle for dignity and human rights continues. Some of the slides will speak for themselves, and some I will make commentary on, so I try not to go too fast. Look for these words as we share our story. The ones in red are particularly important in terms of our family history. But first, a moment of history. How many of you have heard the term chattel slavery? Many people do not understand that it was different in Africa as it was here in colonial and what the British and other parts of the empire did. So if you were enslaved in America and one of your parents was enslaved, particularly the female, there was no way out. So our great-great-grandparents were enslaved, William and Ellen Craft. 1826, one was born, 1824. 11 years old, just like what's happening in some of our incarcerated places today. She was given away and she never saw her mother until, and I'll talk about that later. She was enslaved to her half-sister. William saw his parents and his siblings sold on the auction block and never saw them again. Anyone ever heard of the term jumping the broom? Yes. It wasn't legal. It didn't carried legal privileges. So, of course, William and Ellen never wanted to have children while they were enslaved. Because what would have happened? The children would have been never free. Can you imagine these two 20-year-olds coming up with such an incredibly exciting and dangerous plan? Okay. Yes. My granddaughter will share a poem now.
Flight. To flee is to find finally, forthrightly, a freedom formerly unfound. In the fetid places where soul could not embrace the liberties of a promised selfhood, where the grace of liberation did not dwell. So flight becomes the only and final solution, a rushing forward, a going forth, of finally, triumphantly having fled.
So they went by train, by foot, by ship, any way they could. And they were not on the Underground Railroad. They were in plain sight, hiding in plain sight. Many of you have heard of the Underground Railroad, but they had not even shared any of their secret plans to escape with anyone. Why? Because you never knew who was listening, who could have given them away. Christmas Day, a special day for us, because that was the day that they reached Philadelphia in the free state of Pennsylvania. So the Crafts spoke out all over New England because they had to flee to Boston, where it was a larger Black abolitionist community. And Ellen had not been a public speaker, and she sometimes sat on the dais listening to Frederick Douglass, listening to William Wells Brown and other abolitionists as she was gaining her speaking legs. Initially, the book was published in 1860, which I'll go into in a minute, and Ellen's name was not on the book. The credit was given only to William. Why was that in the 1800s? Yes. So the story that we now understand is, of course, Ellen and William wrote the book together, but in Victorian England, many women only were quoted as the word anonymous without their actual name. The anti-slavery community in Boston was very, very vociferous, and many things happened with them speaking out there. But then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Does that remind anybody of certain acts that are happening now, where people can be snatched off the street and kidnapped? So even in Boston, a free state, William and Ellen were followed by people like their owners. Even the president at the time was supportive of that act. So they had to flee again. That's an actual poster that was in Boston that was passed around so that they were warned. And this time they had to flee to Canada and finally to England. But before they left, they got married legally. Have you heard, any of you heard of Reverend Theodore Parker? He was a well-known abolitionist. I see some heads shaking, yes. Nonviolent, they had to protect themselves. Who gave it to them? A minister. Hard times. So the Crafts went first to Nova Scotia, where they had quite a few interesting experiences, and then they took a ship to England. And Ellen got very ill because, of course, they were in the hold of the ship, and she almost didn't make it. And when we think back about what our great-great-grandmother had been through at that time, and the fact that she was so ill, we're really blessed that she was able to survive. And they landed in Liverpool, because in 1833, Great Britain had abolished slave trade, although most of their slavery was still going on in the Caribbean and other parts of the world, but officially the slave trade had ended. And they stayed there for 20 years. They became members of the community. They had 5 children. The 5th one was actually born when they returned to America. The first one, Charles, was my great-grandfather. William had been trained as a cabinet maker, and Ellen found work as a seamstress. And they also were sponsored by Lord Byron and his wife and others who were part of the abolitionist movement in Great Britain. And they finally had learned to read and write, because they were forbidden, as many enslaved people were, from reading and writing. So how did William and Ellen know how to navigate the trains and the ships? Because what happens when people are in the room that are not considered people? They saw at their white slave owners' tables, they heard everything, and they buried it and kept it in their hearts so that they were not uninformed. They just did not know how the letters particularly formed, maybe for this train is leaving. But at the time that they were escaping, can you imagine their nervousness? At one point, and the reason Ellen was bound with her arm in a sling and looking as if she was infirm is so that if she was asked to write her name on any of those places where she was escaping as a white man, that pretending to be, she would not be able to sign her name. And there were a few harrowing incidences where they were almost captured. There is a film that is being made about the Crafts by Hollywood. It was started in 1918, and we're still working on it. Our family are consultants, and they try to create the story based on the truth. But many of you have stories, as we do, that are in the public domain. So there are people that have told our story all over YouTube, many, many places. We don't have any control over that. We like to share and tell our own story. And it's important that we do it and that we pass it on to the generations. But this Hollywood film, first what happened, the pandemic, then the writer's strike, then the producer's strike. So it's entitled 1,000 Miles with the name 1000. So watch for it. The producers of Ghost, the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg and the other people, I can't remember, the Zuckers, they are still working on producing this film with the director. And I've had an opportunity to do something really special while I went to their home as a consultant. When people tell our story, we feel that it needs to be honored. So we have done a blessing of the ancestors where we pour a libation into the earth to ask permission from William and Ellen that we tell their story. So I'm in this home in Brentwood with fancy carpets and everything. And she said, "You need a pitcher?" I said, "Yes, I need a pitcher of water." And so she brought a pitcher of water for me, and I said the libation, and the maids and all the people around are watching me pour the water on the floor thinking, well, we're going to have to clean that up later. But the fact that they were open to understanding that the privilege that they were having to tell our story made me feel that maybe our film might be in the right hands. So they did write their book. 1860 it was published, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom. Those are some of the places in Great Britain that they lectured and pushed forth for abolitionist to join the anti-slavery movement. They were even at the 1851 Great Exhibition in Paris. This is some of the most fascinating part. William went to Africa 3 times, to Dahomey, which is now Benin, and the West Coast, to try to convince the African kings who were part of the slave trade to grow cotton in Africa and not sell human beings. Here's a former enslaved person traveling 3 times to Africa. Imagine how long that took, leaving his wife and children in Britain. And he gets there, and the kings say, no way, it's too profitable. And remember, when we went back to chattel slavery, slavery in Africa was considered different. It was like indentured servants. You could actually work your way out of a familial situation, not like in America. But he was awarded 50 slaves, boys, and he immediately freed them and sent them to a school on the west coast of Africa in Wida, where he was working with other Christian missionaries. There were people who tried to convince Ellen that she was so fortunate to be able to be in England and not be a slave in the United States. But who does that remind you of as they're putting people on planes, sending people back to countries that they've never seen? Aren't you lucky to be able to get on this plane? History repeats itself. So after 20 years in the United Kingdom, and after the Civil War had ended, where slavery was abolished, let's talk about what really abolished, but legally it was abolished in 1865. William and Ellen could have stayed in England. They had a home. There is a plaque for them where they used to live. They were very well known. They were safe. Their children were educated. But yet, in their hearts, they decided to return to America, and they founded a school and a church for newly freed, formerly enslaved people. But the Klan was active, burned those down. And that's why I think if they brought the possessions with them back to America in 1869, that we never saw the book, Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom, because that book had been published in England, and maybe it had burned down in one of those times that the Klan burned their homes and their schools. One of the Craft children, William Ivins, remained in England, and we have English cousins that we're in touch with now, and they tell the story too. The plaque on the left, the blue plaque, have any of you seen the heritage plaques when you've gone to London? Princess Diana has the same plaque that William and Ellen do. So they are honored that they were there. And my grandfather is up on the upper left, and I grew up with my grandfather, who told me this story, who told my mother this story, who I told my children the story, and now our grandchildren and maybe our great-grandchildren. Ellen died before William. Their graves are in Charleston. The book, Underground Railroad by William Still, who was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, that's the first time that my brother and I actually saw the story or saw the picture of our great-great-grandparents. And our mom was a griot. Do you all know what the term griot means? It means storyteller. It's an African term, which means that a family is carrying on the legacy, pretty much orally, of the family. And this outfit that I wear, my mom wore this when she was doing what I'm doing today, and one day I'll pass it on to my children and my grandchildren, because we believe that this family stories and the history of them are precious memories. So I urge all of you to interview your grandparents, your aunties, your uncles. You have every means with your hands right now. These little phones can record everything, but even talking to them is a wonderful thing. So my brother and I learned to read. We were 5 and 7 when we first saw the Underground Railroad book. And there were so many words in there we didn't understand. But my mom made us pronounce abolition, fugitive, enslavement. We called it the Big Green Book. Then, still on my mother's side, there's another branch of our family. We are descended from Thomas Jefferson's plantation, Monticello, through people who were enslaved there, family members. We are related to Sally Hemings' sister. Some of you have heard of Sally Hemings. Her half-sister was Elizabeth Hemings Bell, Mary Hemings Bell. So my grandmother, Bessie Trotter Craft there, which you'll hear a little bit more about, is through that line. So on my mother's side were the Crafts as well as the Trotters. And that's why I have all those names. I like to honor each branch of my family. And my daughter is named Craft and also Moore after her father's side of the family. And some of our grandchildren are named Craft. And Kaylin is picking up the mantle and being the youngest griot of the family, Kaylin Craft Daylions. Go back? Okay. So, we have some people that like the history of our family, and they made a film out of it already. How many of you have seen Glory? Well, my great-grandfather, James M. Trotter, was a sergeant, second lieutenant in the Black Regiment of the Massachusetts 55th for the Civil War. And some of what he worked on, what you saw Morgan Freeman's character, where people were not given their proper pay, the soldiers were not given their proper pay. Well, my great-grandfather fought for that. And when they were doing the historical background of that, for that movie, they were basing it partly on what James Trotter had done. So that's my great-uncle, my grandmother on the left, and her sister. James Trotter had been born enslaved in Gulfport, Mississippi, and had fled with his family to Ohio. He became educated and wrote a book in 1878. And there's a gentleman here in Long Beach, Charles, who's the gentleman that does the classical black music? John Malveaux. John Malveaux is one of the members of our black community that looks into black classical music, and James Trotter actually wrote this book in 1878 about black classical musicians. His son, my great-uncle, William Monroe Trotter, inspiration for me, went to Harvard and founded the Boston Guardian, which is a radical newspaper for equal rights. And he was outspoken. My son, we own the sword that was used in the Civil War. That's my son holding on to it. He's not here today. His name is Christopher Trotter Day. So my grandparents married in Boston in 1912. But in 1915, Uncle Monroe and his sister protested the racist film Birth of a Nation that was shown at the White House by which president? President Wilson. Yes. And Trotter got kicked out of the White House. He was asked to leave because he was so angry that they would show that film. Also, it was shown in Boston, and Uncle Monroe and his sister chained themselves to the movie theater to prevent people from going in there. He was also a crusader against lynching with Ida B. Wells. Have any of you heard of Ida B. Wells? Uncle Monroe worked with her. And a founding member of the Niagara Movement, which was the precursor to the NAACP. So we have a wonderful history of activism, which inspired me. And these are some of the colleges and schools that my family has attended or graduated from. We keep adding to this list. This is up from 1906 to 2026. Did I do that? Yes, it's updated. So that's my grandson, Isaiah, with Kaylin. He graduated, that was not college, that he graduated from St. Anthony's High School here. And Kaylin went to Poly High School, and then she graduated from Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles in 2023. With her BS. So education continues with our family. My father's branch of the family had something interesting. First black graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and an inventor. When two trains are coming together, opposite, there has to be a switching device that keeps them from crashing. So William Hunter Dammond was one of the black inventors he actually died a pauper because he never got his patent appreciated. And he was a civil engineer. Of course, he was graduate school. So those of you that have inventions get a patent. It was very difficult for any people of color to be recognized. Still is. Some of my cousins from the Dammond side of the family. One is here. David, are you here? Where are you? Oh, there he is. Yeah, he came down from the Bay Area. Okay. So my parents met in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when they were both teenagers, but they didn't get married until after college. One went to University of Pittsburgh, and my mother went to Bates College. This is 1930s. 1930s, colleges were segregated. My mom integrated the women's dorm up there in Maine. So I was born in Pittsburgh. Anybody here from Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh? No? Okay. Hi. And we moved to Harlem in 1947. And you might have seen I'm very at home in almost any church, but I was raised in the Episcopal Church in Harlem, one of the oldest black churches there. And that particular verse has spoken to me all my life because I've been feeling that I've been given much, so of that I am to give back. That's a picture of my church on 137th Street in what is now Malcolm X Boulevard. It used to be Lenox Avenue or 7th Avenue. So my brother and I, we went to a black school early on, and the teacher at that black school, the principal, was actually the daughter of the brother of James Weldon Johnson, who wrote what you may have heard of as the Negro National Anthem. So it was a very small school, and you can see where black history was a part of my upbringing from a very young age. And so we had to sing, lift every voice and sing every morning. So from when you're 5 years old, I know every verse, I can sing it backwards and backwards. And the principal was an amazing woman who had gotten her degree in education and could not find a job from Bank Street College, Teachers College in New York. So she founded her own school. It was called the Modern School. It was in Harlem, and I attended there until, hold on. All right, well, that was what was happening around the country in the 50s. There we are. So my brother and I, we were called Negroes in those days. That term, we were colored, Negro, African American, black. We just know who we are, whatever label people give us. But it was interesting because I was traveling from Harlem every day down to the Park Avenue, the white wealthy community. And we did learn how to code switch. I had to be able to be tough on the streets. And then when I got down to the white world, I had to learn how to speak differently and be with my classmates. That ability has served me well because I've been able to be at home almost anywhere that I go. So I'm very grateful to my parents and to those experiences. I graduated from high school in 1960. And this is 1950s. Remember the Montgomery boycott? Teenagers were doing their teenage thing elsewhere as if oblivious, just like today. There are young people who don't pay any attention to their neighbors being snatched off the street. Many people are at the Super Bowl today, too. Not here. That's okay. We have to have sports. We have to have times that we relax. But we were serious, my friends and me. So we busied ourselves learning about history and about what was going on in the world. We picketed. First time I had walked a picket line, I think I was 16. But then this was a turning point in my life when the Chicago teen, Emmett Till, was brutally murdered and tortured in Money, Mississippi. And his mother, Mamie Till, said, I'm going to leave his casket open. I'm going to let the world see what they've done to my son. And it was in Jet magazine and in Ebony magazine, and we see horrors every day now, but there was no internet, wasn't as much going on. So the whole world kind of stood still. But then we said, what can we do? That is from the Jewish scholar Rabbi Hillel. So we did stuff. We joined the National Conference of Christians and Jews. We continued to become involved in things in our community. That's a picture of my family in Harlem in 1960. On the left is my mother. My grandfather, Henry Kraft, the first American-born grandson of William and Ellen. To his left are my cousins on the Dammond side of the family. And then my brother at the top and my father and me. That's in Harlem in our apartment. So SNCC was founded in April of 1960, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as SNCC. How many of you had heard of SNCC before today? Wonderful, wonderful. All right, great. February 1st is the anniversary of the first Southern Student Sit-In movement in Greenville, North Carolina. Since I grew up in Harlem, I got to hear Malcolm X on the street corners. Stokely used to come to my house before he became chairman of SNCC and Black Power movement. He knew my brother. And Bob Moses is an icon, one of the most incredible people in the world who has taught young Black boys, particularly, the importance of math and finance. That's for you, Sean. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee introduced me to so many people around the world. My pastor, Reverend Lawson, when he was jailed many times, he also was a conscientious objector during World War II and went to India and studied under Gandhi. He brought back the nonviolent direct action tactics that were used in India to dispel the British, and he has been a nonviolent direct action advocate all his life. He just recently passed 2 years ago. So we had to pretend that we did not mind people spitting and hitting us. We had to get ready for being in the movement. In those days, we were strategically nonviolent. Some of us were very difficult, because I grew up in Harlem, I knew how to fight. And I was also a tomboy, so it was really hard to do those practices. But when you believe in something, sometimes you have to have the discipline to work through your own feelings and do things that are difficult to do, don't we? Again, a quote from Reverend Langston. So in 1961, I was asked by CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, to test the first interstate commerce laws by becoming one of the early freedom riders. I was not on the bus with my colleague and friend John Lewis, who was beaten, and others on that Mother's Day in May of 1961. But it was scary, and it also was an opportunity for me to begin to how to bear witness with my body for things that I believed. And then we were asked, my brother and I, to go to a sit-in. And I remember when we got the call. Remember the days when we didn't have cell phones and there was a phone in the kitchen and there was one in the bedroom? We got the call from a friend in SNCC. My brother and I picked up the phone. They said, will you go to jail at Christmas? And without even seeing each other, my brother said yes, and I said yes. And then we told our parents. And so we were recruited by activist Gloria Richardson to go to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is one of the most racist areas in America. We always think of Mississippi, but Maryland was something else. So this is a strategy session that we had prior to decision to sit in because we knew we would be arrested. My brother was 17, I was 19, and it was decided that only over 18 would actually be arrested and go to jail for legal reasons. So he was the lookout, and he coordinated things while we were in jail. This is, you see some of these photos aren't all photoshopped and beautiful the way they are in our phones now and everything, but they're so precious because that is an actual photograph of a photograph of us right after we had sat in and been arrested. And that is a picture of the jail where we stayed, where we were incarcerated for 5 days. But we had to integrate the jail because they didn't put all the women together with the murdering women, and they couldn't put the men together with some of the really hardened criminals. So that was a victory. We integrated the jail. They put black and white girls together and black and white boys together. But the other thing that happened, and this harkens back to how you never know how people could change. It was a jail that was very small, way out in the country. And what do you do when you are in jail? You sing freedom songs. Plus we were fasting because it was Christmas Eve, and we felt that we were making a kind of a spiritual statement of going to jail when Joseph and Mary had been denied a place for Jesus to be born. We were being denied service too. So we did a lot of praying, we did a lot of historical memory. So we're singing our freedom songs, and then we're kind of loopy because all we allowed ourselves was water and gum, and we were sleeping on the floor on mattresses. And this was my first time in jail, scared to death. And we go to sleep, and all of a sudden we hear this sound coming from downstairs where the jailers were. They were singing our freedom song. You never know who can be changed, who can turn around. So as the community was learning about that, the jailers were very embarrassed and they shut up. But we heard them. And I'm in touch with many of these people today. We're all in our 80s. So by this time, I'd earned my stripes as a radical activist. So I got recruited to go to the Deep South. I'd never been south of Maryland before, to be involved in the Southwest Georgia voter registration project. And we taught literacy classes because there were illegal voter requirements for black citizens. White citizens weren't asked to tell you how many times something would happen in the Constitution. I mean, there were esoteric, really weird questions, and so everybody would fail. That's how they kept black voters and black citizens from voting. So we would teach them. Many of the sharecroppers also were illiterate. So we were teaching reading and writing so that at least they could pass the voter test, and then they would come to our schools. But they burned our churches down. That is Dr. Martin Luther King's secretary, Dorothy Cotton, standing next to me as we are mourning the loss of that church. I found this book. It's very old, written in the 1960s, and I've been writing since I was 12, and I found this about how I was processing what I was learning by being in the Black South for the first time in my life. And it just shows you the courage of one person. One person can make a change. Amen. That book is available, by the way, online. It has pictures and things of us in SNCC from those days. I actually have a copy of it, I think, with me today. Charles Sherrod was one of the people that came up to the north to recruit us from the colleges. I dropped out. Again, another church, another gathering. My girlfriend, Kathy Conwell from New York, and I had dropped out of college and went to work for SNCC, and we lived with the woman in the middle. Her name was Mama Dolly Raines. She was a midwife and a sharecropper, and she didn't take nonviolence very, very much. She would sleep on the porch while we were inside with her shotgun over her knees, and she told us, y'all can be nonviolent, but I'm going to defend my house. And she did. Also, I ate fried squirrel for the first time. She told us it was chicken because she told us if we knew it was squirrel, we wouldn't eat it, but she picks it up real nice. So I got to eat a whole bunch of new stuff. This was my third time in jail, and once I was in Albany, so this was my third time and the worst time. That is actually the Leesburg Stockade, where we were arrested and held for 2 weeks, me and Kathy. It was horrible, horrible. And we didn't know, nobody came, nobody was outside, jailers were shooting. I got sick. I left shortly after that. It was horrendous, probably like what some of the people are facing in our detention centers today. Kathleen died in 1988. She's a famous filmmaker, and her film, Losing Ground, is one of the most famous films by a Black woman director in America. Freedom songs, very important for us. Freedom singers, they originated in Albany, Georgia. I knew most of them. Bernice Reagan, who later worked with the Smithsonian, is one of the original freedom singers. So by fall of '62, as I told you, I had gotten ill in that jail, and I decided, well, actually, it was decided for me that my service in the South was appreciated, but since I was from the North and I knew how to talk to white folks, I was to go back to the North and raise money, telling the story like I'm telling you so that we could raise money to keep the work of the South going. And I decided to re-enroll in college. And I got involved in the anti-Vietnam War. Took a moment to go to the march. See me right there? It's me dangling my feet. And my friend John Lewis, who, we were all teenagers together, and we'll talk about John in a minute. So 3 days, when you're in the movement, you just get married and keep on going. You don't even have a big wedding. My father wore his golf shoes to the wedding. I mean, we were all about the movement. My first husband, my children's father. We were married. He was from Harlem. I was from Harlem. We got married. And ironically, remember William Monroe Trotter, the Boston Guardian editor and publisher? Well, Noel's grandfather was also a newspaper publisher in Harlem. So that's why they said 2 newspaper families got married. However, they were on opposite sides of the fence. Fred Moore was a follower of Booker T. Washington, and Monroe Trotter thought Booker T. Washington was an Uncle Tom. So that was kind of interesting. We had 2 children, and Shanti is here today, and you saw my son, Christopher. But here we go. Less than a month, 4 little girls blown to bits. President Kennedy assassinated. Before the March on Washington, it's important to know that there were things happening in local communities, and Noel and I and other people in Boston started the first Freedom Schools Stay Out, and we wrote some of the early curriculum that was later used in the Mississippi Freedom Summer. And we had kids stay out to protest de facto segregation in the Roxbury schools. And we marched against the school board. And actually, yeah, I was still in college there, but I don't think I was in school very much. Other things were going on. But friends of ours who in SNCC were, again, kidnapped and captured, and they were missing. That's Pete Seeger, like Bruce Springsteen and others who are actors and performers. They came to support us. So did Lena Horne, so did James Baldwin, so did Harry Belafonte. Many of them you know, and some they gave money. In the midst of all of this, the Civil Rights Act of '64 was passed. President Johnson. And then here I was marching against the Vietnam War, and I was recruited to go to the Soviet Union, of all places. And I went because I was working for peace, and it was an opportunity. I'd never even been to Canada. I'd never been out of the United States. And I went with a bunch of Orange County school teachers who were very conservative. And I was very skeptical about going to Russia. At that time, it was the Soviet Union, but there were women from all over the world. And I happened to be 4 months pregnant, and I was only 21, and I was a jailbird. So I was mad at America. But I was also grateful to be an American, because when I was in the Soviet Union, the churches were chained, there was a lot of repression, there were some other things that were interesting, so it was a real education. In 1964, I went to the Ukraine. I was spoken, that's in Kyiv, right there. And people were looking at me and saying, "You're not really black, you're not brown like we know the African, students that were there." So I had to explain my whole history. I do speak French, but most of the people in Russia and the Soviet Union spoke another language. So it was very interesting to explain the history of America as they were looking at me, what slavery meant. Voting Rights Act passed. Dr. King, our beloved Dr. King, assassinated. So then I moved to San Francisco, got my BA in radio and television, got involved in women's health, and I remarried this wonderful man on the front row, Ernie Preacely, who, by the way, is an activist of his own right, but he doesn't want everybody to know that. My mom and I, coast to coast, because I moved to California, she was involved in the National YWCA, working for women's rights around the world. And she was involved secretly, and I didn't learn about this till 20 years later, in a secret mission with black and white women that went to Jackson, Mississippi, to work behind scenes for change. And they were, this group, white women from Mississippi, would pick up the black women and make them sit in the back of the car so that the police would think that they were maids. But in fact, what they were doing was revolution. These women who did not agree with their husbands, who were white supremacists, secretly met with Dorothy Height of the NCNW and others. The project is Wednesdays in Mississippi. We've been making this film for 20 years. The producer comes to some of our talks. We will be having a showing of it here in Long Beach, maybe here. We'll also be having it in other places. The film is interviewed people like my mother who were secretly involved in this behind the scenes. This is 1964 and 65. I had no idea my mom was going to Mississippi behind the scenes. And the reason is that Mrs. Rockefeller, not Abby Rockefeller, Mary Rockefeller, was part of this mission, and she lent the Rockefeller plane to fly the women to Mississippi. So it's a wonderful story. And Polly Cowan, who is the mother of my friend Jeff Cowan, who went to Dalton with me, is the former dean of the Annenberg School at USC. So the Jewish community was very involved in the civil rights movement, and Polly Cowan and Dorothy Height brought the National Conference of Negro Women and the National Jewish Women's Council together for this project. And it will be a wonderful film. All of the women are deceased now that were on that mission, but they were able to get the cameras to them and get their histories. I belong to Holman United Methodist Church. There's my granddaughter. That picture, Kaylin, one day will be really special that you had it with Reverend Lawson. You remember that day? Yeah. So then, education is a theme in our family, right? I didn't get enough, so I went and got my master's when I was 52 here in College. Go Beach! And I've never regretted it. Then I was fortunate to get the Rosa Parks Award in 2015 with Robert and Helen Singleton, who were on the bus with John Lewis. They were actually on that bus that burned. And there's that wonderful activist, Jesse Williams, on the left. So Kaylin went to Poly High School, and she's always urged me to come and speak to her classes. So that's Kaylin and me in 2016. Go Poly. Go Jackrabbits. And we have a freedom school in Long Beach that continues with Reverend and Mrs. Leon and Paula Wood. And then, remember President Wilson? Yeah. So my brother's daughter, Lalu, is a filmmaker, and she graduated from Princeton. But in 2016, a group of them said, we don't need Wilson's name on these buildings here. We're taking it down. So yay, activism continues. And then in 2022, Kaylin and I and other cousins went to Monticello and were part of the Getting Word Project, which is getting the word out about the enslavement by Thomas Jefferson of so many Black Americans. Family pictures, I tell you there's too many to go into detail, but I try to put everybody in them. That drawing at the bottom, my son did that of William and Ellen Craft, by the way. Yeah, I like that. More family, all over, doing good things, going to school, having children, getting married, protesting. That's my brother's son, Tokia, with his son, Simon, and Lalu and her husband and children. Both of them just graduated from Brown University. And then my brother's stepdaughter and her two sons. One is at Stanford right now, and everybody's doing good things. My husband's family, some of them are in the front today, Marcia and Gerald, and their son are incredible. One is teaching at University of Virginia and came to Monticello when Kaylin and I spoke there. And Karen, are you still here? Okay. There's Ernie's other niece, Karen, and her family and daughter. And then when I married Ernie, he had two sons, so we have a blended family. And the baby in the middle is Amora, born on my birthday last November. So she's the newest one. She's not even a few months old. Many books have been written and published about our family, as I mentioned, especially the one that won the Pulitzer Prize. How many of you have heard of Master Slave, Husband, Wife, or read it? Oh, okay, good. Yeah, Ilian Wu and I speak around the country together. She's wonderful. She took our story, took 7 years to write it. It's a historical masterpiece. It's a historical narrative, but she did a wonderful job. And there are some cousins with her in New York when the book was published. We've also founded our own William and Ellen Craft Foundation to be able to handle our own narrative, where you will be hearing more about that. We have a website. And that's the Getting Word Project at Monticello, of which I've served on the committee, and Kaylin has put her name in the hat with her younger cousins to be a part of this. The Mellon Foundation funds a great deal of Monticello. Why is it important that a private foundation give money to talk about enslavement?
So that when we have an administration like this one.
Thank you. The federal government cannot change it like they're trying to deal with the Smithsonian. So we're fortunate that the foundation at Monticello is a lot of private funding, so we can say and do other things, and he can't touch it. Books about Uncle Monroe, and there's a film that is made. It's a video. It's been on PBS about how the movement of and his work in the early 1900s. That's the Hands on the Freedom Plow book that I have my story in, one of 52 women in SNCC. Because everybody was talking about the men in SNCC. You know, John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael and all the ones. But we got our act together and we all told our stories. It's available on Amazon. And this is our big opening, thanks to my granddaughter, Kaylin. She said, Nana, you've written poems since you were 12. Let's do a book. And so she designed the book. We have it here today. It's for sale. We read from it. And Charles Brown, one of my colleagues here, and I are trying to do maybe a poet's corner at the African American Cultural Center. So all of you who are poets, write on. Thank you, Kaylin, for urging me to do this. So, now it's your turn. These are the things that you can do. Andy Goodman was one of the those 3 students that were kidnapped and buried and murdered by the Klan in 1964. So his parents in New York founded the Andy Goodman Foundation. How many of you have heard of Krista Tippett? Yeah, her work is incredible. She has a podcast. These are all things that I think about. How can we stay involved? You can find a place for yourself to do something. My husband comes with me sometimes. I found this on Facebook. If you can't protest, you can still write postcards. You know, my feet are hurting too much. I can't march too long, but we can do something. And these are things in Long Beach that you can be involved in. I'm involved with the Friends of the Long Beach Public Library. Would that group please stand? My friends from the Long Beach Public Library, Samantha, Ellen, yes. And the reason I do that is because they have put a great deal of time and energy into making sure that banned books are an issue that we can fight against. So thank you to the Long Beach Library. Interval House is something I'm involved in to prevent domestic abuse, League of Women Voters, Hunger Action Los Angeles, so many things. Remember John Lewis said, get into good trouble. More books, things to do. Now here's where one person made a difference. Do you remember her name? Darnella Frazier. She was the teenager who actually filmed the knee of the policeman on George Floyd that killed him. And she was brave enough to keep filming. Other stuff you can do, postcards. Bill of Rights. They say we should carry that with us now in our cars. Speaks for itself. Remember I talked about one person difference? Remember the days of Richard Nixon? This was the security guard who noticed that that door was propped open. Remember that, Bonnie? You remember that? Yeah. So one man made a phone call. He didn't just walk away. He did something, and it ended up with Nixon being impeached. This Voting Rights Act of 2025 is still not passed. That is one of the great sad things that didn't happen before John passed. So we have to work for that. And I'm so proud of our people here in Long Beach. Jessica Quintana is a dear friend. I've worked with her for many years at Central Cha, And our own Robert Garcia is doing the right thing. History does have its eyes on you, every one of us. Light and salt, as Reverend Petra said. Light and salt. Do something. So in February of 2016, to commemorate the craft's first stop on their secret journey to freedom, the Savannah College of Art and Design created a plaque that they put in the floor. How many of you have been to see SCAD? It's an incredible college and museum. Anyway, they have a whole exhibit on William and Ellen Craft, and they discovered that the museum was built on the B&O Railroad stop where William and Ellen had made their first stop out of Macon. So they invited us, and I wrote a poem, and my granddaughter will share that with us now.
This poem is titled, A Calling Forth from William and Ellen Craft. Today, we stand, our family in a perpetual circle of grace, listening to our ancestors calling us, through blood, through sacrifice, and communal space, to rise, continue, celebrate, and persist on this continuum of collective effort and individual sacrifice, following their stepping stones to liberation.
That's it.
Thank you.
Any questions, any comments? Any thoughts? Yes? Hi.
First of all, thank you. That was just an incredible presentation. I'm so glad you came today. But I just did have one question. What is your perception about the many successes your family has had on both sides? The role that the fact that you're light-skinned blacks played, if any. What's your perception of that?
Yeah, I mean, it is America where certain looks are considered one way or the other. And I think when I was arrested a few times in Georgia, I got handled really roughly because they could see in me that I was the result of rape. So sometimes that has been a difficult thing for me because I've been very fortunate to know my family history, not only in America, but in places like Brazil, where 80% of enslaved people were sent, 80%. So in America, between the United States and parts of the Caribbean, we have a whole mixture of things. It's a very complicated question, but I'm grateful that my family, I'll tell this is an interesting story. You saw that we are related to Sally Hemings' sister. When I was growing up in Harlem in the 1950s, there was a magazine called Our World. Is anybody old enough to remember that magazine? It was 1949, 50. The word got out that my family was related to Thomas Jefferson. You know, we thought, everybody who heard about it in the 50s, there had not been any DNA to find out exactly who of the children of Sally Hemings that he had raped, or whatever you want to say kind of relationship it was. And so my parents and my auntie didn't want anything to do with it, because we did not want to be related to a slave owner. So we buried that story. I found it in the archives, and that's how my family always worked. We never stood on any laurels of anything to do with our color. We just recognized that it was there. We recognized that maybe certain doors opened to us that might not have been open to other people, and that we have been, just like my great-great-grandmother, who literally looked white, or she could not have passed. That's why if they pick a black woman to play the part of Ellen, she has to look white, like one of my nieces, because she sat on the train next to someone that she had served dinner to the night before. And the reason she didn't talk is she was scared to death. And that's why she had on the hat and the glasses and was, pretending to be ill, because she literally looked like her slave masters. And the reason she was given away is she kept being mistaken for one of his children. It was the mistress that said, she's got to go. I don't want her to be considered one of my children. What did you say?
Are there more trainings for nonviolence?
Yes. Holman United Methodist Church, that was the church of Reverend Langston for over 25, 30 years. He just died in 2023. The film that he is made about his life, called A Better Way, is coming out. And there are nonviolent trainings at that church, at our church. It's on Adams and Arlington. It's interesting, nonviolence, isn't it? What is that really, I always like to say nonviolent direct action, because you're not standing still. What you're saying is that you refuse, what we were doing is refusing unjust laws, the same way that people are protesting now in Minneapolis and other places. So don't let anybody think that nonviolence is namby-pamby. It's not. I always get questions, right, Corey? Where'd Corey go? From his school. Oh, there's his other brother. That's Caleb in the back. Well, what if somebody has a gun? Are you going to just be nonviolent? And no, I would not want to just take it. I would run. I would try to disarm the person. It's not something that today was what we were doing then. We had a different moral compass than exists in America today. We had allies from the white community, as I said, some that would bring us food at night to the home of Mama Dolly, but they said, don't let anybody know we were here at night. And if you see us in the street in the day, don't talk to us. We are for what you're doing, but we are not ready to lose our jobs. So it's complicated. But nonviolent direct action is a strategy that can be used for many, many different things. So yes, there are trainings, and some at my church particularly for people when the Black Lives Movement came to want to do protests, they came because many of us at that church have been veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. So it's a strategy. The British, Gandhi, used it in the Shanti Sena troops. Actually, my daughter is named Shanti after the Shanti Sena troops of India. And in 1960, when she was born, she's like, I was named Shanti. Nobody knows what that means. And well, it means peace. So there's a lot of complicated issues, aren't there? It's not easy answers. When you decide where your red line is and what you have to do, sometimes it may take you to a place that's very uncomfortable, but you have to be ready to make that decision for yourself. Yes, Charles.
as an addendum to that, let me ask you, what is your perception of the role of the church? We're sitting in a historic church here in Long Beach who stood up for a number of things that weren't part of the regular agenda.
Yeah.
What role do you believe the church has played, either historically or just from your participation?
Yeah. Well, there are churches and there are churches, right? There's Christianity and there's Christianity. So the name alone doesn't always mean the same thing. However, in the early civil rights movement, the churches were the places that opened the doors to integrated teaching and learning, so they had a role. There are brave ministers today who are doing things. I think because churches have a space where you can meet, and if that space is used for a good reason, like this church is giving to the community, my church does too, often you will find the distortion of a message that is carried forth. So sometimes I don't want to call myself by one name because I am a person of spirit. I happen to go to a United Methodist church. I found people of spirit who are not in churches as well. I don't think you have to be a part of a church, but I think there's a role. And we use that role throughout the South and in many parts of the United States. So I think it has a role. I think schools do too, as well as businesses. Wherever you can speak out and wherever you feel comfortable that that's the threshold with which you cross, then you have to be ready to deal with the consequences. So as people make their decisions, like you saw up there, some people, all you may want to do is go to a nursing home and read to somebody, because you just to do an act of kindness is an important thing. Some people are ready to march. Some people are ready to go to jail. Some people are not. I got bad feet now and I can't march, but I've written postcards and I'm calling a congressperson, Republican congresspeople, every day, so that I tell them I'm not in your district, but do the right thing. So whatever you can do to make this world something place that you can be proud of, and we're fortunate in Long Beach that we have a very active community. That's why I put some of the organizations up. So I think that the role of the church continues, Charles, but it depends on which church and what they're doing.
Thank you so much for watching this presentation of Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Us Round by Peggy, Trotter, Dammond, Preacely. Mrs. Preacely mentioned more than one book in her presentation, and in the video description you will find links to all the books that she mentioned. I just want to reiterate that I really hope you share this video with a young African American, because we need to make sure our young people know this history. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe.